We've been getting a lot of questions from you about what's going on between the U.S. and China with, this whole tariff thing. It's
Yeah.
obviously like top of mind for a lot of people who are, following all of these economic trends.
Yeah, definitely.
And so for this deep dive, we're really going to tackle this head on.
Yeah, let's do it.
We've gone through a lot of really interesting analysis to understand where things stand right now with this conflict. And I think the big takeaway is things have really shifted.
Yeah, for sure.
This is not just your regular trade dispute anymore.
Yeah, you're right. This is what a lot of the sources are highlighting, is this really fundamental change in the relationship.
Yeah.
The kind of tariffs that they're putting on each other,
Yeah.
the scale of it, is just way beyond what we're used to with trade disputes.
Right.
So we're definitely in this new territory that people are calling economic warfare.
Yeah. It's a whole other ball game. And I mean, the numbers themselves are kind of mind blowing. Like the US has a 104% tariff on certain Chinese imports. And then China comes back with 84% on specific American goods.
Yeah, it's huge.
I mean, those aren't just like, nudges. Those are like major roadblocks.
Absolutely. And what that means is, the old diplomatic playbook, where countries try to hash things out and find a compromise,
Right.
seems like that's out the window.
Yeah.
The focus now is not really about negotiating. It's more about how do we just manage this new reality?
Yeah.
How do we just, kind of survive the consequences? Because there are going to be real-world consequences for everybody.
Yeah. For everybody listening to this, too.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we're saying it's not just a trade dispute.
Right.
Like, what sectors are being hit the hardest by these tariffs on each side?
So on the U.S. side, it seems like they're really going after sectors that are crucial for kind of dominating the economy and technology in the future.
Right.
So we're talking about semiconductors, which are basically the brains of all electronics,
Yeah.
electric vehicles, solar panels, which are key for clean energy,
Yeah.
uh, rare earth minerals, that entire supply chain.
Oh, wow.
And of course, all the consumer electronics that we all use every day.
Yeah.
This is really about controlling what's going to be important in the future,
Mm-hmm.
not so much what's important today.
Yeah. That makes sense. The U.S. trying to stay ahead.
Exactly.
So how is China responding then? What are they targeting?
So China's response seems very deliberate. They're going after areas where the U.S. economy really depends on and actually has some vulnerabilities.
Okay.
So their 84% tariffs are hitting things like agricultural exports from the U.S. So that's soybeans, corn, pork.
Wow.
These have been big exports for the U.S.
Yeah.
They're also targeting aerospace components, which is interesting,
Yeah.
chemicals, and then significantly high-tech machinery.
Hmm.
So you can see that last one is kind of a direct response to the U.S. trying to hold back China's own tech progress.
Right. So it's like a very calculated back and forth. And it sounds like the usual channels for, figuring this kind of stuff out, the diplomacy channels, have basically gone silent.
Yeah, that's what the analysis shows, that there's a real breakdown in communication,
Yeah.
at the high levels of government.
Yeah.
And it just seems like it's really difficult to find a path to de-escalate the situation.
Right.
It's almost like nobody's willing, or maybe nobody even has the political space to compromise anymore.
Wow. So we really are in uncharted waters here.
Absolutely.
This is not about some trade deficit on a spreadsheet. This is something much bigger.
It really is.
So let's talk about those consequences. What's the real world fallout of this whole economic warfare thing? What are we actually starting to see?
Well, one of the biggest impacts is this huge disruption to global supply chains.
Right.
These incredibly complex networks that have been built over decades,
Yeah.
connecting all these, raw materials and factories and consumers all over the world.
Yeah, it's a global system.
It is, and it's under immense pressure now. People are using the word splintered,
Yeah.
and I think that's a really good way to describe it.
Interesting.
Companies aren't just thinking about saving money anymore. They're really worried about risk,
Right.
geopolitical risk.
Yeah.
So they're trying to make their supply chains more resilient, and that means less interconnected and potentially more expensive.
Right. So these nice, long, efficient chains are breaking down.
Exactly.
So where are we seeing the biggest impact of that splintering?
But just think about the car industry.
Okay.
They're constantly dealing with shortages of semiconductors and other parts.
Oh, yeah.
So maybe you've noticed that it takes longer to get a new car, or some features aren't available.
Right.
Then there's consumer electronics.
Uh-huh.
Production delays are happening all the time.
Yeah.
So you go to the store and the shelves are empty, or you have to wait forever for your new gadget.
Yeah.
And maybe the most worrying thing is what's happening in the pharmaceutical sector.
Oh.
if the supply of ingredients for medicine is disrupted, that can have a huge impact on people's health.
Yeah, that's scary.
It is.
And, all of this disruption is fueling this other big concern that the sources are talking about,
Yeah.
which is stagflation.
Right.
This kind of like double whammy of rising prices and slow economic growth.
Exactly. That's the worst of both worlds.
Yeah. So are we actually seeing this stagflation happening now?
Yeah, we're definitely seeing signs of it in both the U.S. and China.
Mm.
Consumers are facing higher prices for everyday things. That extra money you're paying at the grocery store.
Yeah.
That's directly related to all of this.
Wow.
And at the same time, economic growth is slowing down or even stopping completely in some sectors.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed prices going up.
Yeah, and what's really important to understand is that this isn't just a U.S. and China problem.
Okay.
These inflationary pressures are spreading all over the world.
Oh, wow.
Across Asia,
Oh.
Europe, emerging markets. It's creating a lot of uncertainty for everybody.
So nobody's escaping it, really.
Not really.
Now, one sector that seems especially vulnerable, at least from the U.S. side, is agriculture.
Yes.
And the sources are using some pretty strong language here that they're talking about an existential crisis.
Yeah, it's a very serious situation.
Yeah. So what's going on there?
Well, China used to be a huge market for U.S. agricultural products,
Right.
like soybeans, corn, pork.
Uh-huh.
And now that market is basically closed off.
Wow.
And that's been devastating for American farmers.
Yeah.
We're seeing a lot more farm bankruptcies, and a lot of rural communities are struggling to stay afloat.
That's really tough. And I mean, it's not just these traditional industries that are being hit, right?
No, you're
The
right.
tech world is going through some huge shifts as well.
Absolutely. The days of the U.S. and China working closely together on technology, those days seem to be over.
Really?
Yeah, we're seeing joint ventures falling apart,
Wow.
licensing agreements being canceled. That whole tech ecosystem that used to be so interconnected between Silicon Valley and Shenzhen,
Right.
it's splitting apart now.
Wow.
And this could really change the way technology develops globally in the long run.
Yeah, so this tariff war, it's not just about trade numbers or, who's buying what. It's really changing the whole global system.
That's exactly right.
So let's talk about those bigger global repercussions then. How are other countries being affected? How are alliances changing because of all of this?
Well, this conflict is really forcing countries to rethink their relationships. China is facing a lot of pressure from the U.S.
Right.
So they're turning to other partners, like the BRICS nations.
BRICS.
Yeah, that's Brazil, Russia,
Yeah.
India, China, and South Africa.
Okay.
It's a group of emerging economies, and they're becoming more important. And China is also strengthening ties with countries involved in the Belt and Road Initiative.
Right. That huge infrastructure project.
Exactly. So they're building their own network of allies.
And what about the U.S. then?
Well, the U.S. is also looking for new partners.
Okay.
They want to build more reliable supply chains.
Yeah.
So they're working with countries like Mexico, India, and some Southeast Asian nations.
So it's like the whole world is rearranging itself.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
really is. And it's shaking up the old system of global trade.
Right.
The World Trade Organization, WTO, which was supposed to be the referee for all of this.
Right.
It's losing its power.
Really?
Yeah, we're seeing this trend towards regionalism,
Okay.
where countries are making deals with their neighbors rather than trying to work within a global system.
Interesting.
And that's a big shift with a lot of implications for how trade happens in the future.
And all this instability, this uncertainty, it must be affecting the financial markets pretty heavily.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, global stock markets have lost trillions of dollars in value
Wow.
as investors react to all this risk and uncertainty.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And at the same time, we're seeing what are called safe haven assets.
Okay.
Things like gold, government bonds, even digital assets.
Right.
They're going up in value because investors are looking for something stable. So yeah, if you're watching your investments, these are pretty crazy times.
Volatile times for sure.
Yeah.
So looking ahead then, if this all keeps going in this direction, what kind of future are we looking at?
Right.
The sources are painting a picture of a much more divided world.
Yeah, a lot of the analysis is pointing toward this idea of an economic iron curtain.
Oh, wow. An economic iron curtain.
Yeah, so imagine the global economy split into two big blocks.
Okay.
One centered around the U.S. and its allies,
Uh-huh.
and the other around China and its partners.
Okay.
And then all the other countries in the world kind of having to pick a side,
Right.
which obviously would have a huge impact on global politics and stability.
Yeah, it would change everything. And I mean, the economic fallout could be even worse, couldn't it? There's this real possibility of a global recession.
Absolutely. That's a huge concern.
Yeah.
If this tariff war keeps going through the rest of this year and into next year,
Yeah.
the chances of a global recession become very, very high.
Wow.
The economic models are predicting big drops in GDP in both the U.S. and China.
Oh, no.
And because the global economy is so interconnected,
Right.
everyone would feel the impact.
Yeah.
Jobs, investments, everything would suffer.
Right. It's a domino effect.
Exactly.
And beyond just the overall economy, shrinking or growing, the sources are also talking about this idea of strategic resource wars.
Yeah, this is another really important aspect of this whole situation.
Yeah. So what does that mean exactly?
Well, as these economic blocks become more defined, the competition for resources is going to heat up. We're not just talking about trading finished products anymore.
Right.
This is about securing access to the raw materials that are essential for everything.
Right.
Things like rare earth minerals that are used in all kinds of technology.
Right.
Making sure you have enough energy in a world that's becoming more divided. Even making sure you have enough food to feed your population. So in a way, this tariff war is just the beginning.
Wow.
It's the opening salvo in a much bigger struggle for control over the resources that everyone needs.
So it's like countries will start using their control over these key resources as like a weapon almost.
Exactly. It's a form of leverage in this new world order.
And then finally, there's the tech world, which seems to be heading towards its own kind of separation.
Right.
Some people are calling it a technological Cold War.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
So what does that look like in practice?
Well, we're probably going to see different parts of the world developing their own separate technologies, their own standards, their own systems.
So like different operating systems, different ways of communicating, different approaches to artificial intelligence.
Exactly. And that could really slow down the overall progress of technology.
Right.
And make it much harder for countries to collaborate on big challenges.
Yeah, that's a shame because collaboration is usually how you get the best results.
It is. But in this new world, it might be every country for itself.
So just to sum it all up then.
Yeah. This is not just a little trade spat that's going to blow over.
Yo.
It seems like we are witnessing a fundamental reshaping of the entire global economic order.
Yeah, that's the key takeaway here.
Wow.
The analysis is very clear. This U.S.-China tariff war is a sign of a really deep shift.
Yeah.
We're moving towards more economic separation, more nationalistic economic policies,
Okay.
and a lot more fragmentation in global trade.
So this is not a temporary blip. This is the new normal.
This is the trend that's going to define the next decade at least.
And you said earlier that this is not like anything we've seen before?
Yeah.
Like it's not just a repeat of history.
It's not just a replay of old trade wars,
Right.
or even a direct parallel to the Cold War.
Right.
This is something new.
Yeah.
This is a Cold War where the weapons are economic.
Okay.
Tariffs, trade restrictions, sanctions.
Wow.
The battlefield is the global marketplace.
Yeah, so this has been a really eye-opening deep dive, I think.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack. Yeah. It's a complicated situation, but it's so important for everyone to understand.
Absolutely.
So for everyone listening out there, think about what we've talked about.
Yeah.
This economic iron curtain, this possibility of resource wars.
It's serious stuff.
How could this affect you,
Yeah.
your job, your industry, the way you see the world?
Think about it.
These are big changes, and they're happening right now.
They are.
So it's time to pay attention and really think about what it all means for you.
You got it.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll be back soon with more insights on the forces shaping our world.
See you next time.